All right. So here we are in one of our test boxes that we're going to walk through today. And with PowerSchool OIDC, whether your district is looking at Google, single sign-on, Microsoft single sign-on, or a combination of both, which is available now. We have seen success with districts making this transition to single sign-on. And with the most recent PowerSchool events, some districts are now taking a harder look at single sign-on. And if you're already utilizing some single sign-on, especially for your students, it does make sense to maybe go ahead and pull that over into PowerSchool. So the first thing we want to look at here in our test box, if you click on your help icon here on the right-hand side, your question mark, and we're going to point you to meta documentation. And within the meta documentation, you can use your little search filter here and type in OIDC, and you'll see a couple of items here. We're going to talk about this staff mapping import. We'll talk about that here later on this morning. But what we want to point out to you is this PowerSchool SIS OIDC Authentication Overview Reference Guide. It's a mouthful. This reference guide is with all documentation that you select. It'll download and you can open that up to look at. And you'll notice here, I'm going to pull it onto the screen. This reference document was first created when single sign-on, when OIDC authentication started, those discussions started taking place. And if you'll remember, that was with the 23.5 release, PowerSchool release, which was some time ago. And we had districts that were using the classic menu, and we had districts that were using the enhanced menu. So part of the creation of the reference guide was to point out the different navigation paths when using the classic and enhanced menu. Now that all of our districts are on the enhanced menu, you'll see the only navigation path is obviously the enhanced menu navigation path. But this reference guide, there are a couple of notes here on the second page, and on the third page, there's some screenshots. And again, we'll reference these items, these screenshots, and these important notes we'll talk about here later this morning. This is just as it is labeled. It is a reference guide. So this is not the instructions. These are not the steps that you'll take to set up OIDC authentication. This is our reference guide. We feel that PowerSchool, their set of instructions is very detailed. It's very easy to follow. It is a little bit lengthy, but when you follow the steps, you'll see success in setting up your OIDC authentication. So we didn't feel the need to recreate their steps, but we did want to provide this reference document, again, with just some important notes here at the bottom that we'll talk about later. So we wanted to make sure you knew where to access that. And then back in our test box here, we are going to look again at our help menu, and we're going to click on System Help. This is where we are going to access PowerSchool's set of instructions for OIDC authentication. So when you get to System Help, again, in your search filter here, again, type in OIDC, and you're going to see in your drop-down the very first item, PowerSchool SIS as OIDC service provider for single sign-on. This is the instructions. These are the steps. So when you get to this page, you can see on this page, all of the steps are listed out here on the right-hand side. So again, it's a little bit lengthy, but when followed, again, there is success in setting up the OIDC authentication. What we suggest, the very first thing, those district leaders or those staff members within your districts, whoever will be helping with this process, the very first thing all of you will want to do is read through all of the steps first before you start turning things on and enabling things and setting up, read through the directions first. They do, again, have it laid out very nicely. We have seen a couple of districts who went out of order in their setup with these instructions, and they weren't able to make that authentication. And so we had to back step a couple steps and get things in the right order. So it did cause them a couple of hiccups when they were trying to enable their single sign-on. So again, following the steps, especially in order, is super important, and you want to make sure everyone on your team that is going to help out with this, that they understand what the process is and what needs to happen when. All right, so we are going to look at what goes on again behind the scenes in PowerSchool. So we're going to go back to our test box here. And the first thing that you'll want to look at is in System Management, in Server, and then Plugin Configuration. So this is where you will start, is in Plugin Configuration. And in the top filter, again, typing in that OIDC, you will see the PowerSchool SIS as OIDC service provider. When you come in, yours is probably not going to be enabled. Ours in our test box is enabled. Your very first step, again, after you've read all the instructions, you're going to want to come into this plugin and you are going to want to enable it. This enabling, what it's doing, it's enabling the navigation link. It's enabling those SSO tables, exposing those tables that you're going to be using. It's exposing those setup pages. This does not mean that it's enabling your single sign-on. This is just enabling the plugin that you're going to use to set everything up. So you will want to enable this plugin. And you will notice if you click on the plugin name here, as with all plugins, there is a client ID and a client secret associated with it that you are going to need. So if you'll click on the hyperlink here, data provider configuration, this is where you can access your client ID and your client secret. Again, this is what information you are going to need when you are setting up on your Google or your Microsoft admin side. When you get to those steps of the OIDC instructions, you're going to need your client ID, client secret. So we want to make sure you know where to get that to enter it on your Google side. Okay. So again, once this plugin is enabled, you will now see within your left navigation path, you'll see a new link. So again, if we're in System Management, and now we're going to look at Security, we now see OIDC Authentication. So this navigation link, this was not here until the plugin is enabled. Once that plugin's enabled, you'll now see this link. And if we go to that link, this is our setup page, and this is what it's going to look like when you come to this page for the very first time. So this is, again, where you're setting things up for your user groups that are going to be using single sign-on. To get started, you're going to click Add. So with OIDC authentication, you do have 4 different user groups that you can enable single sign-on for. Staff and teacher, and we're going to look at this next, but staff is your staff logging into your admin portal. Teacher are your teachers logging into your teacher portal. Parents are just that, they're parents. We don't have any districts using single sign-on for their parents. We wouldn't recommend that. So we're just going to skip over parents, and then student is obviously your student groups. So you would select which user group you are wanting to set up OIDC authentication for. You do not have to set this up for all of your user groups. If you want to only set this up for students, you can. You can use this for students only. You can use it for students and teachers only. You could use it for staff only, or a combination of any of those three. So again, it's not an all or none option. You can select which user groups you're wanting to use or wanting to use as a single sign-on. So looking at your students, if this is Google that you are authenticating, you're wanting your students to authenticate with, you're going to be entering the IDP URL for Google, accounts.google.com. And this is where this next client ID, client secret, this is the information that you would get from your Google admin side. So again, the client ID and client secret that we saw in the PowerSchool plugin, that information is what you would need to put into your Google admin side. And from your Google admin side, you would see an ID and secret that you would then place here in your client ID and client secret field. Okay. Your scope, open ID, email. And again, these are laid out within PowerSchool instructions. We're just kind of walking through it. But it makes sense to us. Most single sign-on is using email as the authenticator, and that makes sense to us. So again, open ID email, and then your authentication ID, identifying claim, email. So this is, all of these areas are part of your setup. This next section right here, enable OIDC authentication for student. This is where you want to pause. You don't want to check mark this box yet. Check marking this box, that is the switch that is flipped to start the single sign-on. So when you check mark the box and click submit, that is when PowerSchool starts to require, in this case, your student group to use single sign-on. So again, we're setting up at this point, so we don't want to enable it yet. This next section is the mobile app ID setup. I'm sorry, mobile app setup. This is in PowerSchool's instructions. There's a section where you literally will be copying and pasting information in here. If you want your, again, in this example, student user group to use the mobile app, we are asking that you pause on the mobile app setup. Please do not set this section up yet. Because as you know from past, this most recent district leader meeting, we are discussing the new parent student portal, My PowerHub. Because we still have those discussions taking place, we would ask districts to not set up the mobile app just yet. We'll have more information as we continue discussions with My PowerHub. So for right now, again, we would suggest please leave this blank. So once you have your setup information for your user group, in this case, student, you're going to click submit. Again, we did not check mark that box. We don't want to enable it yet. And it's going to ask us to confirm our submit. And it'll do that because of that check mark box, wanting to make sure that's what you're wanting to do and to enable it. So you can see we just created our student user group with Google, and we can see it is deactivated. We didn't check mark that box, so the status is showing us it is created, but it has been deactivated. Now what you can do here, again, you're selecting which user groups you want to push single sign-on for. What you can do now, if you have multiple user groups that you want to use single sign-on, you can add a different user group. You can click add to add a new user group, or within this action ellipsis, these three ellipses here, if you click on that, you'll see you have the option to edit, copy, and delete. So you can always edit your previous entry, which is what you would do when you're ready to come back and enable. You can delete, obviously deletes it, takes the information off, or you can make a copy. So if you are using, we use Google for our student, and maybe we wanted our staff to use Google as well, we could, making a copy enters all of that information. So now all we would need to do would be to save the setup. Again, we don't want to check mark the boxes yet. We would want to save our edits here. You'll notice in the staff and teacher group, in our drop down here option, it has them listed together, but down here at the bottom where you're enabling, this is again the switch that you're turning it on, you'll see that staff and teacher are two separate check boxes. So again, you can enable for one or both. You don't have to do both. You can do one or the other, or you can do both if you wanted. And you can click submit and confirm your submit. And now you'll see your staff and teacher listed here. So that's if you want to make a copy, because both of those groups are going to be using Google. You may be a district that uses Google for your students and Microsoft for your staff and or teachers. That is fine. You can use OIDC authentication. You can set it up for both of those scenarios. So I'm going to delete the copy that I just made. And I'm going to add now, I'll add a user group again, our staff teacher user group. And maybe now I want to say Microsoft. So again, this is allowing your districts to, again, if you have one user group using Google, one using Microsoft, this you can set it up that way. Again, on your Microsoft admin side, you would have a client ID and secret, and you would want to enter that information. And with Microsoft, it is going to be the OpenID email. And again, you would then submit your changes. Take this back. For Microsoft, it's OpenID profile email for Microsoft. Again, this is laid out in PowerSchool's instructions, but we're just walking through it here. So we're going to submit that. We're going to confirm that submission. And now you see we have Google for our students, Microsoft for our staff and our teachers. All right. Looking at our staff and teachers, we want to talk about this for a minute, particularly your staff user group. So when you're looking at single sign-on for your staff users, your staff is your admin staff within PowerSchool. So that affects anyone who has an admin account within your PowerSchool. For example, Meta staff. We at Meta, we have admin accounts in your PowerSchool environments. Staff also includes any third-party vendors that may have credentialed accounts into your PowerSchool environment. So those are things that you are going to want to think about if you are discussing enabling single sign-on for staff users. You have to think about who you've given permission to get into your SIS that is outside of your own local staff. For us at Meta, we know that our metasolutions.net, our email account credentials, they do work allowing us to single sign in to the districts that have enabled OIDC authentication, whether that's through Google or Microsoft. We have some districts using Google, some using Microsoft. That doesn't matter. We are able to log in because we have created a file that contains our email addresses, and all you would need to do would be to populate the information for import. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But what we want to point out at this point is when you are discussing enabling for staff, think about those third-party accounts. Third-party vendors. Some third-party vendors Maybe they no longer need to have a credentialed account. Maybe they have provided updated methods for pulling the data from PowerSchool. Usually that's through a plugin. So maybe they have that plugin available, and that's how they're getting that data from your environment. So they wouldn't need a logged credentialed account. But again, that's something that you want to take a look at, because if they do need a credentialed account, they are going to need the global ID information populated in order to log into your account. And we'll show you what that global ID is. I can't see the chat. Are there any questions so far at this point? Sarah or Christine, is there any chat questions?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat at this point.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So we are going to, we'll keep going then. So again, we've said before, you don't have to enable all of the user groups. You can do 1, 2, or 3, whichever, it's your call, it's your district. And you can decide how you roll this out. If you want to roll it out to students and then a couple months later roll it out for teachers, again, that is up to you. We will say districts that are using LDAP. If you are currently using, let's say for your staff, you're using LDAP and you want to switch your staff users to OIDC. You can, one thing to note is once you enable OIDC for your staff, so once you come in and you check mark the box to turn it on, to start using that single sign-on, you will want to go back to your LDAP directory setup screen within PowerSchool, and you will want to disable the user group. Again, if it's staff, you'd want to disable that on the setup page. PowerSchool, unfortunately, it will allow you to have both authentications going at the same time. There's no benefit to having both going at the same time. And actually, we did see a district having some increased slowness and some other things that were negatively impacting their connections because they had both enabled. Again, if you are currently using LDAP and you want to switch to OIDC authentication, once you come in and you check mark this to start, you'll want to go in and disable your LDAP. Okay, so now that you have everything set up and we can see things are deactivated, we haven't enabled those yet. What needs to happen now is those global IDs that I had mentioned just a few minutes ago. Those global identifier, those fields need to be populated within PowerSchool. The global identifier, that is what is being used to authenticate and allow that single sign-on to happen, that connection to be made, and letting that user log into PowerSchool. So again, on PowerSchool's instructions, on their OIDC set of instructions, the next step that they're going to be telling you to do is you'll go to Data and Reporting, you'll go to Exports, and you're going to go to Data Export Manager. So in Data Export Manager, again, once you enable that OIDC, the PowerSchool OIDC plugin, once that's enabled, it is creating new single sign-on tables. So in our category, we're picking PowerSchool data sets, and then we're going to export from, and in our example, we're going to export from the students, from the student mapping table. So what we'll do is, now that we've selected SSO student mapping that we're exporting from, we are going to check mark the box here beside student. We're going to select all of these fields. We want to export all of this data. So we've selected the boxes. We're going to click next, and then we are going to export. Looking at this export, you will see, put onto the screen here. you're going to see all of the fields that we pulled to export. We're going to see our student DCID, first name, middle name, last name, on and on, email address, and then here in column K, the global identifier. This is the field that needs to be inputted for import. If your district has done a decent job about collecting student email addresses, entering that in PowerSchool, this next step is going to be very easy. All you need to do is copy, and you can select all of it to copy, and then you're going to paste it in column K. You want to make sure you don't paste over the heading. You want to leave global identifier here, but you want to paste those email addresses because, again, in our setup, we selected the scope was going to be OpenID email. We're using email to make that connection. So again, you're going to copy and paste your email addresses from that export. You're going to paste it into the global identifier column here. And leaving that global identifier header, you're going to need that header. You're going to paste that there, and then you're going to save this file. This is the file that you are now going to use to import into PowerSchool to populate each student's global identifier field. What we want to show you, we mentioned staff earlier with the meta staff. Back on this reference document that we created on the second page here, you'll see again, there's some important information we mentioned earlier. We talked about the staff user groups, user type. Here is a link right here. Meta staff need to have their global identifier field populated, and you can, we here at Meta, we have created this file for our districts to use that has all of our Meta staff and our email addresses and our global identifiers already filled out. What you will notice is not filled out is column A, our user DCIDs. This is because our user DCID numbers are different at each individual district. So we filled out as much as we could, but you will now need to populate for us the user DCID numbers. And we are happy to help with this step. If you just let us know, you could submit a ticket. We are happy to help input the Meta staff information if you want us to. But again, when using this file, this is for the staff user group. So again, if you're enabling the staff user group, we at Meta, we will need you to make sure that our global identifiers are entered in your PowerSchool, otherwise you lock us out. So we don't want to be locked out. You don't want to lock us out. So you want to make sure that our global identifiers are input into your PowerSchool, and you'll want to make sure to enter our user ID information. So again, looking at the student mapping table, again, it's a copy and paste with your teacher. Again, if you're using teacher email and you've done a good job of collecting teacher emails, you're going to be copying and pasting and then saving that new file. And then what you'll want to do is you would then go into Data Import Manager. So we'll go to Data and Reporting, Imports, Data Import Manager, and you're going to now use that updated file that you just saved with all the global identifiers entered. You're going to choose that file, and then you're going to import into the SSO user mapping. When you import the file back into PowerSchool, you'll notice there is only one option to import into. When we exported the information, we had SSO student staff, contact, and parent. We had those 4 different tables to look at. But when importing your file, they all get imported back into the user mapping, SSO user mapping. You'll go through, you'll click next, and you'll see, you'll click the next steps for import, as you would any import, to import those global IDs back into your system. So that is pretty straightforward, the overview of how to export the data and then import it back in. Once you have done that, now what you're going to want to do is you're going to come to System Management, Security, OIDC, Authentication. You're going to come back to this setup page. So now that you have your user groups, their global IDs have been imported in. And let me show you real quick. I'm going to open a new tab. And I'll show you where you can see, this is a scrambled database here. And we'll show you where you can see that information, the global ID field. Oh, this one has LDAP, so I'll look at a teacher one. But on your Guardian Access page, that is where that global ID field is located. So again, once your user group, your data is imported back in, you are now going to want to come to your user group. You're going to click Edit. And this is where you will now go ahead and enable it. You want to flip that switch. You want your students to start using the single sign-on. You'll click Confirm, and you can see your status now is activated. What we recommend with each of these user groups is you have a test student or a test teacher or test staff to log out of PowerSchool and now log back in. Once you have this set up, you're going to need to have somebody test the connection. So you want to have a student handy that maybe can assist you with logging in to make sure that that connection does successfully let them single sign on. If they are not able to, you can come back here again, clicking those ellipses, click Edit, and you can uncheck mark the box. It will deactivate it. So now you can troubleshoot the connection, looking at maybe your Google admin setup, your PowerSchool setup, and see that everything is correct. We want to make sure, this is very important with your staff user groups. You want to make sure 1 or 2 or even 3 people are actively logged into your PowerSchool admin side, because when you click the check mark for staff and it is enabled, again, somebody is going to need to log out to test that connection. If there is an issue with the connection, whoever is still currently logged into the system can now come in and turn that off. If you enable staff user group and everybody logs out and there's a problem, nobody will be able to log back in, including us here at Meta. We would not be able to log in if there is an issue with the connection. So again, it's super important that you have somebody actively logged in to your staff, your PowerSchool admin side when you are enabling for staff. You want to make sure somebody is currently logged in. And again, we are happy to help out with that. If you let us know when you are doing it, we can have somebody on our team actively logged in, as your district has, again, a couple of users testing that connection.
Sally, can I add a couple of things right here?
Yes, please.
So as Sally said, this one's really, really important. And you want to make sure that the person you have logged in, your tester, whatever, actually has access to the screen, not just, somebody who maybe doesn't have access. And even though Sally has stressed this and we talk about this, we always seem to have somebody who forgets that part and gets locked out. And then what happens is we talk about you. So we just want to make sure that you know this is really important.
Yes, it's super, super important. Yes. It has happened if that makes you feel better, but it is important to have someone in.
Yeah, so that's where the we talk about you part comes in.
Yes. Yep. All right. So again, once you check mark that box, it is now activated. It is enabled. Students will now be required to use their single sign-on to get into their student accounts. Again, if we come back to our student account, I'm going to refresh now that we've activated it and we've turned the others LDAP off. You can see now that identity provider global ID. This is where the field is located. And you'll remember I went through all of the steps, but I did not click for import. Otherwise, you would see that here. Obviously, that's what you want to see when you do your import. You want to make sure the data did get imported correctly. There are a couple of other things that we just want to go through with your OIDC authentication. And when you're setting that up, there is a customization within system management, security, and then right underneath your authentication, you'll see OIDC Global ID Sync. So what this does, what this customization is doing, it is looking at those core emails and OIDC emails. And this is OIDC email is their global ID. And what it is doing is you can select en masse to have that information synced. You can select just individual students if you wanted, or again, you can en masse sync all of those. What this customization uses, it uses Data Import Manager to do the import, to do the syncing. So just like you did at the very beginning when you're setting this up and you've exported all of your student information, you've entered those global IDs and you've imported it back in. That is for your students as of right now, as of today. So when you get new students who enroll within your district, or you have new staff members that you're entering into PowerSchool, these are also things that you need to think about with those new enrollment set up with your staff at your district, how you handle those processes, and how the global ID field gets populated for those new students or new teachers, new staff. This customization will help with that. Or again, looking at your processes if you want to set that up separately, but something that you'll need to think about. So again, with this customization, it'll sync the students, the staff, and the teachers. So again, that helps in maintaining your data because again, those new users will need access to the environments, and you'll want to make sure those global IDs are populated. All right, so that is pretty much the overview of what the steps have laid out here. There is set up on your Google, on your or your Microsoft, whatever you're using. There is set up on that side of things. As you walk through these steps and you're beginning the process, if you have any questions, you need any assistance from us, as always, submit a ticket to us. We are happy to help with this process. As we've mentioned before, we have multiple districts, some using Google, some using Microsoft. We see success when setting up, following the steps. We see success in that, and we are happy to help however we can. We do like to know when you decide if you decide to enable for staff users, because that does affect Meta staff. We just ask that you let us know what day you will be enabling that for staff members. That way we can let all of our staff know. We're very familiar when we log into districts now who have single sign-on. It's just nice to give our team members a heads up. Hey, when you're logging into this district, they're now using single sign-on. So before you check mark the staff box, just let us know.
Sally, we do have a question.
Yeah.
And Mark wants to know, instead of using the whole export import process, can they just use the sync, the OIDC sync process instead?
To set up at the beginning?
Yeah.
That is a good question. I don't know that we've had anyone use the sync at the beginning. So let me check into that and I can get back to you. That's a really good question. So let us see what the options are for that and we can get back to you.
Yeah, when we first did this process or started looking at it and wrote the instructions for it, there was no such thing as the sync, the OIDC sync. That's something that we created. So yeah, we can definitely check that out.
All right, I will, I'll stop the recording now, but we will hang on if there are additional questions. But we want to thank you for coming today, for participating. And as we've mentioned before, as you are looking at this within your districts, please let us know what questions you have, how we can